Hi, my name is Audrey McKinnon. I'm 38 years old, and just 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD. It's a diagnosis I suspected since high school, almost as long as I wondered if I might be autistic too. But I'm not the typical stereotype of either, and just like many other girls, I was easy to miss. I almost failed art in grade 3 because of a crumpled up assignment I tried to take home and finish, then didn't, but I was easy to miss. I barely finished high school with 1% in English and 49% in math just weeks before the final credits were due, but I was easy to miss. I changed jobs, careers, and apartments as if change was water and crisis was air, but I was easy to miss. Just like many girls, I was found to be depressed and anxious or just dismissed in the doctor's office. In the real world, I was lazy, disorganized, and weird at best. At worst, I was a problematic, burnt-out employee and alcoholic, and as a consequence for my impulsive decisions and misjudgments, there were times I was homeless and hungry. Like many girls my age, just finding out they meet the criteria for ADHD, autism, or both. Only now, after decades of shame for failing so badly within the framework of neurotypical expectations, like many girls my age, I was misdiagnosed, dismissed, or missed altogether. And so that's what this podcast is about. It's a collection of stories to start correcting the narrative about ourselves because we deserved better. And it's not too late to start now.
What's my personality and what's my ADHD? Is ADHD my personality? And that's the weird thing to me, is kind of trying to navigate that as well, is like, now that I know all of these things that create me, it is hard for me to pull apart, like, who would I be personality wise without this?
Well, does it matter? Because you have ADHD. It is,
Yeah.
it's part of your, it's how your brain functions. And what is your personality if it's not how your brain functions?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point to make. I think because I've always felt different, and like, I don't know, when you were mentioning earlier about, right, this idea of wanting to welcome people into your life and circle. I'm not sure. I was definitely a target for bullying when I was younger. I think I just was easy, right? Because I was just this like little happy to go lucky kid, who was in conflict averse and just was an easy target. And I think for me, I've always put down, even before I was diagnosed, I always thought like, oh, that's the reason why I am similar to you in that way, where I always want people to feel included. I always want, I have a wide, it's like, it's important to me to always, to have that and to always make sure other people feel heard, because I didn't feel heard for, so long. But yeah, going back to that, I think you're right. I think that maybe because we put so much focus on, as a society, and personality, right? Whether or not it's like, what are your interests? What do you do for fun, right? Like when you go on a date, it's like, what do you do in your spare time? What's your job, right? Like all of those things. And frankly, I think it is like, when I first met my partner, I was working at a health clinic, I was just, it was an admin job. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And I was a little like, oh, how do I explain to him that this isn't like what I want, what I want? Like, I'm here now, but I don't want him to judge me based on what I'm currently doing, when it's like not what my actual vision is, if that makes sense. And I think that oftentimes when you're struggling, especially when it comes to like retaining employment or finding work that's meaningful for you, which is something I've certainly experienced, that can take a hit. And also, again, kind of feel like, well, how do I identify? Because so many people identify by their job.
Yeah.
So like, what is my identity then?
Yep. I think I'm also thinking about the other side of this question of like, separating the disability from the personality. And some people don't like to refer. Are you hearing the sirens coming through?
Okay.
Okay, I'll wait for them to pass. Thinking about that question of, separating the disability from your personality. And disability, I know some people don't like referring to ADHD as a disability. I personally think that it's a good description of it. As separating the two, there's this other part of me that thinks like, maybe it's not fair to say it's part of your personality. And I also think it's maybe one of the reasons that people like don't want to get medicated or something like that, or don't want to medicate their children, because they're like, oh, I don't want to kill that spark. You hear that all the time. I used to worry about that in myself, like, because I've suspected I had ADHD since I was in high school.
Right.
But I would like, it was one of the excuses for not going and getting a diagnosis, is I would say like, I don't want to treat it because it's part of who I am. I don't want to kill the spark, because I was kind of like fusing it with my personality. But I have to say, like, when I started taking medication, and it did help me with a lot of the symptoms of ADHD, I felt maybe even more like myself in some ways. Um, and yeah, it's a confusing question, right? Because
Yeah.
you also don't want to say that. I mean, I've experienced depression before. Is depression part of my personality? I don't think so. I don't think that would be fair for me to say either. So yeah, I don't know where the line is. I'm back. I'm actually back where we started with this, like of not sure how to answer the question, kind of like you were in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's probably no like real answer for that.
Yeah.
And but I guess when I think about it too, I think about, I know you've had your own experiences, but like, you know, people who have really, really struggled to, right, whether or not it's with addictions or with, right, and so it's become such a defining part of them. And now that we're understanding more that there actually is a link between, right, ADHD and addiction, I think it's something like, I cannot say this stat directly, but there's a pretty high percentage of people in prisons, right, who have
Yep.
diagnosed
There's a statistic to back that one up. Yep.
this. So I was like, I'm not going to say the number, but it's a surprising number if you don't know about it. And so, and you know, my one of my day jobs is working with a homelessness charity, and so even I kind of see our clients differently sometimes now, where I think like, oh, you know, how many of them have some undiagnosed, or you know, or even diagnosed
Yeah.
condition, whether or not it's autism, you know, ADHD, other neurodivergences, that's
Hmm.
to their situation now. And so maybe that's where I think about the personality aspect of it, where it's like for those individuals, people see them as, right, someone who's struggled and then maybe gone through, you know, some whether or not it's, once again, experiencing things like homelessness, addiction, even being imprisoned. And that's kind of how some people define them. And it's like, but there is a root cause to it. I think that's the stuff I find very interesting, and that needs to be able to be peeled back more a little bit in terms of the
Totally.
national conversation, because, right, even now, like we're just sort of in the throes now of understanding, like you said, is ADHD a disability? If it is a disability, and how do we define that? How does that impact what we learn or how we approach it in schools?
Hmm.
I think about that a lot, where it's like I would have benefited from, I don't know if it even was more support as a kid, but from maybe a different structure, right?
Yep.
Schooling. Like as a kid, that's what I needed. My mom has this joke, I like to joke about it, but she got a call when I was again in senior kindergarten from my teacher, who was the only kid in school in the class who didn't finish her Easter basket on time. I just wanted to let you know. And my mom was like, she's 5. She's like, well, what was she doing? And she was like, well, she was talking to all the other kids. She was busy chatting. And my mom's like, okay. And she's like, well, you know, these kids, they had a deadline essentially. I make the joke now that I was like, I was just networking. I was networking before networking was a thing. I'm so good at networking. I've like brought me to my adult life that I think actually has done me a lot of service. But, and you know, this is 30 plus years ago, but still this idea of like, this is what these kids need to like accomplish in their day, right? And then the kids that are hyperactive get pulled aside as, okay, we need to address them. But then the daydreamers, right, aren't given the resources
Hmm.
to feel
Yeah. I mean, I just like, I hear that this is what kids need to accomplish in their day. And I'm like, says who?
that's friends.
Who decided that, and why? Like, really coming down to why. Like,
Yeah,
we're going to get systemic on if we go too far down this rabbit hole, but, and which is important. It's the whole reason why, in my opinion, what a disability is it's a disability in the context
exactly.
of certain expectations.
Timing and ADHD is an example of that, right? So I have notoriously been bad with timing, and as a lot of people are, and and there is that whole thing where it's like you think logically in your head, this will take me 10 minutes, right? Or I can absolutely meet that person in time, right? You don't really have whatever, for whatever reason, it's kind of not there that you're like, that's probably not a realistic timeline. But, even with one of my jobs, I'm very thankful because I ended up getting a full-time job where I've been with this company for a long time, and they thankfully, like, I sort of pushed the envelope a bit with them. And once again, I was undiagnosed, but it was almost like because they knew I was a hard worker and that right. So if I stumbled in late to work, I wasn't penalized, whereas a lot of people are, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me to function, like yeah, absolutely. I was, show up at work to work at 9. One, I'm not a morning person, but two, like I would just, it's really easy to misjudge your timing. And so, point, right? It's like, well, here we have built a society that is based on, for the most part, shift work for sure, but you're 9 to 5. And for anyone that doesn't fit into that, they're penalized versus understanding and adapting to the fact that, like, say you can disclose to your employer, I have ADHD. What this means is that I, don't always, not the best at showing up right at 9, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to complete my work. And
Yeah.
with my employer, I was able to shift my hours. At one point, I was doing 10 to 6 because I was like, that's more feasible for me. That's something that I can build into my schedule a bit easier. Unfortunately, we haven't reached that point, I don't think, where people are comfortably able to disclose to their employers, these are my struggles, and this is how my workspace needs to look in order to adapt to that. And I think that's the next leg of understanding how this impacts people, is fixing that portion of it.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. And I will say that one of the reasons that I've been kind of on the fence about whether I get back on my medication or not is because I have been asking myself, like, have I adjusted my life actually far enough to a point where a lot of the effects of ADHD are not impacting me negatively right now. I've created, I work for myself now. I make my own hours and everything. There are challenges with that ADHD creates some challenges with that, but I've built in a lot of space for myself to, like, regulate my own emotions and access resources and keep things interesting and et cetera, et cetera. My life is very kind to me. It fits me a lot better than the box I was trying to fit myself into before. And because of that, I still have ADHD, but I actually don't feel punished by that most of the time. So, I mean, in the ideal world, that's how it is for everybody, is that, whatever your ability, you're met with a kind, the right shape box. And it's, you can meet your needs, because I think it all comes down to unmet needs when we're talking about even our experiences as kids. What made that hard is people weren't able to identify our needs. We weren't able to identify our own needs, and because of that, we internalized negative stereotypes about ourselves. But if somebody had met our needs and said, like, looks like you're getting overwhelmed, let me help teach that skill to you, or teach some different coping mechanisms for you, or like just co-regulate with you for a while, like, I just think I would have developed a lot more. I would have encountered fewer problems in my early 20s.
I do have another question for you, if that's okay,
Yeah.
because I am someone who, so, as I'm getting closer to thinking about, do I or don't I want kids with my partner, right? And I think they're probably, that's a decision I obviously will have to make for myself, but also I think I sort of have this internalized fear too of like, I can barely take care of myself. Like, I need someone, me. How do I then, where will I find the energy or like the ability to look after someone else if I need taking care of?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to ask you as a parent, what have you found surprising about what you have been able to maybe accomplish as a parent with ADHD versus, because I think you often see the negative of it, but there are a lot of strengths in ADHD, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, what have you found
I
has
mean,
been?
I love being a parent, and like but it's I was in like dire straits when I had $20 in my pocket, and that was all I had to my name when I found out I was pregnant. I didn't receive any kind of support, and like I had periods of homelessness and it's extreme poverty, like to the point of like not being able to, not having enough food for him and stuff. So I had like a lot of like life complications like during the early years of parenthood that I mean, where I was in my life probably had a lot to do with my undiagnosed ADHD. Um, but uh, I mean, I loved being a parent even then. I love my son like to death. And has ADHD impacted how I parent? I think I have a lot of compassion. And I mean, you talked about this, how you felt, and I had never heard this from you. So I really appreciate the things you said about, liking the way that I mentored you when we worked together. But like, that's how I've approached parenting. And because I also question everything, I think that I think I'm a really good parent. I'm very in tune with my kids' needs. I think a lot about unmet needs, and when things haven't been very easy or haven't been going well, like for some reason there's behavior that doesn't isn't working out very well for my kid over the years at different times. I'm the kind of parent who's willing to question myself and question whether I'm doing things right and look for science backed or data backed information on how I can support him better and meet the need better. I'm always thinking about the need. And also, you go through that stage of parenting where your kid's like asking why about everything. And I loved that because I was like, that's a good question. Like, why? I really, really ended up like on the same side of the question as my kid during that stage a lot of the time. Like, Mom, why aren't I allowed to swear? Because I'd be like, don't swear. And then he's like, why aren't I allowed to swear, but I can hear you swearing? And I'm like, holy cow, that's actually a really deep question. Like, why do we as a society say kids can't do this, but adults are allowed to? And I came up with like my own rules just based on like I go down these rabbit holes of learning things and everything. So I don't know. I don't know how much of this is connected to my ADHD or it's my personality or whatever, but like I think I've been a very like inquisitive parent, very in tune parent, and able to question myself and able to question society as a
Mhm.
parent, which I think is a huge pro. I think I'd like to see us like as a society moving in a better direction at all times. And being a parent forced me to face some really interesting questions over the years about that. And to raise my kid in a way that I think is like the best way that I could possibly do it while helping him fit into the structures that are there, but also like helping him question the structures that are there. Does this
Yeah,
answer your question at all? I feel like it's very like nebulous.
I think the thing that I have struggled the most with in my lifetime is decision paralysis, right? Which, I don't know again how commonplace that is for different women, but I am constantly like, in the space of, um, and by decision paralysis, I also mean, right, the inability to kind of move forward in the way that I want to. And I think when I think about children, it's like the biggest decision you can make, right? It's like
Mm.
once the only thing in your life that you can't undo if you're like, nope, don't like this. So up until now, I've been able to tell myself like, well, if I'm, even if it's hard, if I make a choice, there's always an option to undo it or do something different. So
Right.
so it's interesting because I think I get into this space where, and I will preface this with saying, this next point was saying, you know, I am grateful that we live in a world now where people are much more open about talking about kids and whether they want them
Yeah.
or don't want them, looks like. But I think I hold on to this fear, and I mean, I'm a great aunt. I love my nieces. Like I know that the irony is, like, I know that I could do it because I do it for my, I'll make sure they're fed before I'm fed when I'm looking after my brother's kids. Like that's not a question. But maybe because I still feel like a little bit of a kid myself, and because I'm more of a needy person, and so sometimes I think about that where maybe if I had a kid, before my 30s, I might have felt more like an adult in a way. And I don't know or if that's something that is commonplace with maybe again everyone with ADHD or with people that don't kids with ADHD in terms of being like, this is something that I'm still, again, navigating with my own, like, can I raise myself, right? Am I able to raise myself? So,
But I think that, like, I mean, my personal experience as a parent is that it's been a period of growth for myself as much as for my kid, like, and it's taught me to advocate for myself in a way that's really respectful to somebody else's needs as well. Like I do, if I have needed space at different times, and I, have different needs, or like not able to, keep the house in a way that I want to because I'm dysregulated for a period of time, finding, age appropriate ways to communicate that to somebody who has, in my opinion, his needs are more important than mine. But I still need to meet mine in order to meet his, and finding ways to communicate that to a kid is like, it's developed a lot of emotional maturity in myself over time. I think it's okay to be, personally, I'm going to speak about my personal experience because I think that that is such a personal decision. But my personal experience is that it's been it's been good. It's been healthy to learn about myself and to grow personally. And also, I'm still a kid too, but I'm 38 years old, but I'm still a kid, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I maybe this is just our generation that we feel like this. We, for some reason, I hear this from a lot of millennials, right? Like, I feel like I never fully grew up or something like that. But I think for myself, that's just that I've held on to some youthfulness, and I enjoy my life. And I'm not saying other people who feel like they've grown up didn't, but I don't think I ever lost that like inquisitiveness that you have when you're younger, and I don't want to. And I also think it makes you a good parent if you have that. If you're questioning with your kid, like, it's an exploration. It's been an exploration for me over the years.
without having a diagnosis, what was the turning point for you that you went from really struggling, like you said,
Yeah.
to sort of gaining that more of that stability in your life? What was there, like a triggering factor for that, or like was there something that just
Well, it was always survival. Like, and this is maybe, I've heard like people with ADHD have like a, that when you're in an emergency, you're like the calmest person in the room. Like, I've always felt that way. So like I was in a crisis for years at the beginning of like the parenting years. And every time I've been in a crisis, I find a way out of it. I'm good at that. So it was constant, and it took like over a decade for me to um, get out of a state of crisis with him. Maybe less than a decade, I think. But yeah, I think everything that I was doing was just for survival for a long time. I would say the thing that changed, though, this is interesting, is that like there was all this stuff that I was doing to survive for all these years. And then it was just like a year and a half ago now, probably, that I got diagnosed with ADHD. And that's when I started having self actualization, which was like beyond survival, like confirming that question in myself of like, is this what it is? Is this why I'm like this? Is this what's wrong with me? Quotations. Um, Finding that out, confirming that piece, and facing that, and finding solutions through that, and contextualizing my past. I think that's when I started actually being able to ask myself questions like, what do I want to do instead of what do I need to do to survive? And that has been like a huge shift the biggest shift from being diagnosed personally?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, once again, when I look at different people's journeys and I understand that people are affected in different ways, and I think a lot of that can, relate back to upbringing and supports, right? There's all of these factors that can kind of lead you to go directions you go in.
Yeah.
But I really just understanding, like, as much as it's a joint experience, when you meet someone else, you're like, oh, you have ADHD. Everyone's journey is so unique still, in terms of,
Totally.
right, commonplace items that are like, oh yes, I feel that, I think that, and there's solace in that, I think. But there's also this understanding, and I've learned a lot just, again, reading more about. I want to say this in a way that's not disrespectful to anyone else, but I feel like I've been quite lucky in my ADHD journey, in the sense that, right, I think I could have, in different circumstances, I might have struggled more in certain aspects of my life, but I think I've always had pretty strong support networks that have helped me maintain my mental health in positive ways. So like I said, I recognize, and I think that's, once again, something that I am always keen to learn more about, is like, how does this look on a wider scale, and what are we seeing? Because we do have a lot of stats on men, but we're still missing the statistics on the impact. And I think every time I read a story about, like, a 56-year-old woman finding out and that she has ADHD, and it just hurt, like, it's the relief, but I think that's where maybe the grieving comes more into it, because it's like, I've lived most of my life with this.
Yeah.
I don't have that opportunity now, potentially, to retrace my steps and to do that. So that might be more where I've heard more of the grieving part of it. Whereas, but I think it's just important to acknowledge that, like, yes, it's a shared diagnosis, it's a shared disability. I also like to use the word disability. I think it's important.
Yeah.
But it's also something in such a personal journey.
Sorry, you cut out there. It's a shared disability, but it's also
personal experience for everyone, like, very personal journey for each.
It is. And there's still a lot of commonalities, though. It is really interesting, because I've been also, interviewing all these different people with different experiences, and there are so many, like, common milestones. I think the grieving process is one you see in a lot of people, and that can look like different things for different people. I think that's what it is there's kind of these, like, you tend to see a pattern of recognition, acknowledgement, and discovery. And then how that looks in each person, their individual story, maybe also how much support they have. And comorbidities is probably a big part of it too. Like, do you have other things going on, that, like, other mental health issues or medication that prevents you from taking medication for ADHD, like cultural things, all of those kinds of things, I think, affect then how it percolates into your life, right?
Yeah, I will say, I think one of the most, like, interesting things that I've found out about even the medication route is that when women are menstruating, the ADHD medication doesn't actually work during that time.
Have you experienced that?
I kind of have, to be honest. Like, I not maybe to the extent that it's been, like, documented, but when I think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, no, those are some, like, that's when I do a bit of a lull, right, where it's harder to get into the mindset. And my I take 5 ants, and it doesn't seem to be kicking in as much as usual. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I'm like, oh yeah, definitely I've experienced that, but when I think about it, it's certainly, like, present for sure. But like that's all. I was gonna say, like I said, I just found that so fascinating that was a thing.
Totally. I've been saying for the last year that, like, I have moments where I'm like, oh, my ADHD meds can't like match where I'm at right now. And there's, like, the extremely stressful transitions, if I'm underslept, that I'm like, when I was still taking my medication, I would take it every day, even if I was like, this is going to be a day where my medication isn't going to have any impact. It can't make a dent in this, and I think probably when I was having PMS as well, it'd be the same thing. It'd be like, oh, my medication can't you know, I'm down here. My medication's not like not having enough of an impact to get me into like a fully functioning state of being.
And I think like that again just speaks to like the multi-tiered understanding of how this disability affects women, right? There are
Exactly.
many aspects to it that aren't as understood or are under research. Getting better now, and I appreciate a lot of the writing and yeah, documentation that does exist now. I'm lucky that I'm part of that generation that right does understand it better. But
Totally.
not just about the diagnosis is different, like the symptoms are different. It's also different.
One of the interviews I'm really excited to be doing soon is with a woman who specifically is focused on women with ADHD and pregnancy,
Yeah.
because the hormonal changes are a big factor in that. And then the other thing that we had a little, you know, pre-interview, and she was telling me also about the what happens when you're pregnant and your doctor tells you to you have to get off your medication, and there's a whole bunch of nuance on that, but like definitely when this airs, like you need to listen to that episode because it's going to be like it's really my mind was blown just from the stuff that I've already heard from her, and I can't wait to hear even more information about it. But it seems like there's also a lot of just unanswered questions about it.
Yeah, no, there absolutely are, and I think that's like it's the crazy part is like there's so much we still don't know. Like there's a lot we're learning, but there's a lot we don't know. And I constantly, like, I had to go off my meds for a year, but like probably about 8 months because I was having chest pain, and so it was recommended don't take it. And it was hard. It was rough on my partner. He was like, "Yep, this is definitely like I see the difference. You know, you're not as motivated. You're not like." And when I say rough, I mean like he had to again pick up a lot more extra slack because really like cooking is really hard for me, and it's I work from home, and that is not an ideal setting for me as well. I've recognized it's my reality right now, but as someone who needs relation, it's you know, and then it becomes increasingly difficult to like leave the house. Like, oh, I have to go grocery shopping now, but I don't have the energy to go do that, right? And then it just
Yeah.
piles. And so I think you know working through that and being like, okay, just so you know, it's not because I don't want. Again, going back to laziness, it's not because I don't want to do these things. I just like my whatever reason, my brain, my body is like tapped out. And so I'm currently now looking into other resources to be, or like ways to better manage my day, whether or not it's like, again, going out to a coffee shop regularly or the library, like trying to just build that into my day better to be,
Yep.
to give.
And also, yeah, I've also, because food is an issue for me too. I mean, first of all, I have like, I mean, it's food is like so much work for me. I'm like, and sometimes I just don't like it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like too much. It's too much. So like cooking has never been like a big priority for me as well. And so my husband also does a lot of the cooking in the house, most of the cooking in the house. But like, you know, I can tell sometimes it's too much on him. And there have been periods of time where I've used a service to help me bring the meals in or something like that. I think that can't be underestimated as well. That is a valid accommodation, is getting outside help, having somebody like offload some of that work. So, you know, gives my husband some nights off, and but I'm still I'm just not going to have capacity all the time to do that, and it's unrealistic to think that like maybe that's just not the right time for me to put that burden on myself, because it's going to draw from somewhere else where I need the executive functioning to be. So yeah, there's lots of different ways I think around those problems, and identifying it is the first step, right?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Well, before I let you go, because we've now been talking for over an hour, so because it's so good to catch up with you. Before I let you go, what would you want the person who's listening to this to take away from you?
oh, I think so this is very specific to me and my current like goals, but I don't think it's uncommon for people with ADHD to have big dreams, right? And then to get overwhelmed by trying to achieve them. And some of the best kind of advice or things I've read about is just trying to better address that and understand that, like, for people with ADHD, setting small goals and accomplishing those is just as effective. And not beating yourself up when you don't hit that big goal. And you could be working towards it. Like, that could be something that you're still doing to work towards it. But really just, I think you mentioned compassion. And I've heard this from other women. I've developed so much more self-compassion. I've stopped comparing myself to people as much as I used to, which I think is a healthy thing. And I've started to understand, like, I haven't not achieved what I've not wanted to achieve because I'm not capable. It's because I have been, I'm managing a condition that puts a little bit more of a wrench into my plans. And that's okay. And because that dopamine, you like to get those little hits of dopamine, accomplishing those small goals is really impactful on their own. And like, that could even just be like a goal that's like, every day I want to cook a meal 3 times a week. And then you build that into your routine and you start to feel so much better as a person, being like, I've managed to do that, whether or not it's meal kits, like you said, or other options, but just, and then rewarding yourself for that and telling yourself, like, it's something small, but it's a big deal for me. So that's what I really try to pull on, and I want other people to understand, is that it is a struggle, and especially once you know it, there's going to be moments where you're like this sucks. I hate that this is what I'm doing, but also I think we're also beautifully creative, wonderful people who honestly bring a lot of fun to the world.
I completely agree. We are not boring.
We are definitely not boring, and I think that most of my past partners would say she is the adventurous one and brings a lot of kind of fun. I can actually look back now and be like, yeah, that is one of the things that this has done for me. And
heck yeah,
I love that part of me that I'm.
Me too. Me too. Oh, I love that. I like leaving this on a note of self-love. I really like that a lot.